Welcome to this webinar on developing a communication-friendly early years setting. This forms part of the All Talk project in Waltham Forest, where we've been working to raise the profile of communication and language and also on workforce development in this area. My name's Jo Quinlan. I'm a specialist speech and language therapist working in early years. I'm joined today by my colleague Helen Malik, who is also a speech and language therapist in early years, and Alicia Brett, who's early years consultant for the London Borough of Waltham Forest. A strategic approach to developing good practice around communication and language is vital in improving good outcomes for children. Today we'll be discussing what this looks like in action and the different roles that practitioners and leaders can take in this process. We'll also be hearing from a local early years setting to find out about their practice. So, why is it important to focus on communication and language in particular?
So we know that language and communication is a prime area of the early years foundation stage, and we know that language skills really underpin all other areas of a child's development. We know that if a child has difficulties with language and with communicating, this can really impact on their ability to understand information, to express themselves, to talk about things that they want and things that they need, and it can really have big long-term impacts as well on things like their mental health, their behaviour, and they're more at risk of poorer outcomes later on in life. So we know that approximately 1 in 10 children have a long-term speech, language and communication difficulty, which is roughly about 2 children in every classroom. But we know in some areas of the country, so especially areas that are more deprived, this can be up to 50% of children are starting school without the language skills that they need.
So if we look at an approach which is an early intervention approach, but one which is very broad and focuses on a whole setting, can that be useful? Can that be a good approach to early intervention?
Yeah, of course. The EPI research has shown us that good quality settings that have a focus on communication and language actually enable those children to have better outcomes around communication and language. So the better the universal offer to children within a environment, so the richer that environment is with language and communication, the better for those children. And then we have to look at those real vulnerable children that are coming to our settings, so our 2-year-olds, so the 2-year-olds that receive funding to come into the setting, they are most at risk. So if they are coming into an environment which is universally rich, we have a chance to help support that language development from a very early age.
And so when we think about that universally rich, we're going to look at 3 main areas today that really make up a communication-friendly setting. So the learning and development of the children within the environment, so the learning and physical environment of the setting. And then we'll look at the interactions between practitioners and children, because the role of the adult is obviously very important here. And then the third area is really thinking about how the setting builds relationships with parents to really empower them to take a lead role in their children's development. So we'll look at each of these areas in more detail through our discussions today. So what should the environment look and feel like if we want to support communication in young children?
The environment is really important. So the environment needs to feel inviting to everybody that's coming in. So the parent, the child, they should come into an environment where they are encouraged to communicate with the practitioners in the setting and with their children as well. So lots of interesting things to talk about. But if we think about the environment and the routines of the day, we need to make sure that those routines help to support communication and language for young children. So asking children to help out during the routine is really important and will help them to share their ideas and their thoughts. Also, the way that the room or rooms are laid out. So making sure that you've got an environment that suits all children at different parts of the day. So children are not going to be busy all the time, excited and lively. Sometimes they need those quiet, cozy areas where they can just slow down, they can think about things, and they can have those more authentic communication, conversations with their peers or with the adults in the room. Then we can think about group time. So every setting has some form of group time throughout the day. But we need to think about, do those group times support every child? So how big is your group time? How long is your group time? How are you making your group time meaningful to the children? Is it of interest to the child? Does it come from the children's ideas? And then lastly, we want to think about the reflection of the environment. So we have an environment, it's not set in stone. We have routines, they shouldn't be set in stone. They should respond to the needs of the child. So looking back and monitoring, evaluating the routine, and just asking yourself questions. What is the communication and language like in the environment? Are we seeing children engaging with each other? Are we seeing practitioners talking with the children in genuine interactions?
It's sometimes thinking about what are the opportunities as well, isn't it, for children to have those genuine conversations, to make real choices about their play and real choices about how they spend their time at the setting, rather than, as you say, it being dictated by this very rigid routine, which can often interrupt their play and take away from those conversations.
And I think that's really important, the interrupting their play, because we know that if children are engaged in play, they don't, if we interrupt it, we're going to sort of destroy that learning environment for them. And we want children to be involved in deep level learning. And sometimes conversations will happen during those times, and sometimes they won't, but that's okay, because as practitioners we need to stand back sometimes and just see how the environment is helping to support children's thinking skills.
So as a leader, taking that time really to reflect on what's happening, your physical environment, thinking about the routines of the day, and how can we really make some improvements here. Yeah, great. So if we're going to go on, and you've touched on this already, Alicia, to think about the role of the adult within all of that, how can adults best support children's communication through their everyday interactions with children?
So we know that there are some key strategies that practitioners and all adults can use when they're interacting with children, and we know that these strategies are going to be helpful for supporting the development of those language and communication skills. So really, firstly, making sure that you're taking time to engage with all of the children, so not just the ones that are maybe good at talking and good at communicating with you, but also the quieter ones as well, that you maybe have to make that extra effort to kind of get involved and engage with them. And also taking that time to observe them and to watch and to listen and to see what it is that they're interested in, what are they focused on, what are they playing with at that time, before you jump in and add your language. And then when you're talking with them as well, thinking about scaffolding, helping to scaffold their language and develop their vocabulary by modelling and commenting on what it is that they're doing, and really adding the language to to that play and using that throughout the day. And also, not being afraid of silence as well, because sometimes, we feel like we have to be saying something all the time and doing something all the time, but actually children do need extra time to process that language and to think about what it is that you've said to them and to think about what they want to say. They need more time to do that. So actually sometimes just taking time to maybe just count to 10 in your head quietly, just to give some pauses and have some periods of silence. And the other thing that's important is thinking about all aspects of communication, so as well as talking, also using your facial expressions and gestures and noises, all of those aspects of communication are going to be really helpful as well.
And that idea about modelling is really crucial, isn't it? Because it's modelling the language, but also modelling the conversations, and practitioners modelling those kind of natural conversations, those storytelling opportunities for things like, oh, do you guess what happened to me this morning when I tried to get on the bus, and things like that. Those kind of conversations between each other, as well as with the children and with parents, modelling. This is how you have a conversation, so it comes away from that very teacher model of we're teaching you this and this and this, we're teaching you how to talk, whereas we're just showing you how communication works in this environment. It becomes much more natural and much more meaningful because it's creating that social context for it to take place.
And teaching should be a natural process. It shouldn't be a forced process. And I think sometimes practitioners may think that they have to do things in a certain way, which there are better ways of doing things than others, but it is about that genuine, authentic communication and conversation with young children and amongst practitioners as well.
Yeah. So in terms of workforce development, how do we embed that within the setting? Because that's not easy as a leader. And I think it's about sharing those knowledge and skills and saying these are the right things to do, but then how to, in terms of really getting the practitioners to take that on board in their everyday practice and be confident that they're doing the right things. How do you think really we can go about that?
Well, it starts from the leader. It starts from the ethos of the setting. So to have a really strong ethos around communication and language, knowing how important communication and language is. So it underpins all learning across the EYFS within the early years setting. So it's about that leader being that good role model. So being present in the environment. So the practitioners can actually observe some good conversations happening, some good interactions happening.
So myself and Helen went to visit a local preschool and we spoke to Michelle, who told us about some of the ways that she's worked with her team to develop their confidence and skills in this area.
So Michelle, can you tell us a little bit about how you support your team?
Yeah, I think training, is really important. I've been on some really good training courses myself, and then obviously we cascade the knowledge, probably at staff meetings is a good point. A couple of other practitioners have been actually to Wood Street and had been to a course that was done by the speech therapist, which was really helpful as well. And then some of the ideas that came from the course that we discussed in our staff meetings, we actually tried to put some of those, we then started to put them into practice, and sort of practice on each other.
And when you did that practice with the practitioners, what exactly did you do? How did you do that?
Well, it sort of came from some observations we did. There was some discussion around doing some peer-to-peer observations, but they weren't really happy with that. But they were okay if I did the observations. So I did some observations of them working with children, and then we had some meetings and everybody had a little action plan, things that they were really good at, things that perhaps we could, improve on. And then from that we sort of practiced some of those things on each other and then implemented it into our practice.
And how did it work? Quite well? It sounds like that's quite a nice way to get them to reflect on their skills as well.
It did, and they were quite surprised, I think, by just having someone observe them. They were like, I didn't know I did that. Do I do that all the time? So that was really good, and it made us all sit and think, because then I had someone, do it on me as well.
Yeah.
I find that my thing is not leaving enough space for children to speak.
Yeah.
Is trying to almost finish their sentences sometimes for them. So I was made aware of that. So it was good for all of us. We all came out with something that we needed to work at to make our practice better for our children.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
So some really nice examples there from Michelle.
Yeah, really nice. We spoke earlier about the reflection and evaluating, and Michelle showed us a really good example of how she was able to reflect on her own practice. And that's really good role modelling for the rest of the practitioners within the setting.
And you really get a sense of that when you go there, don't you? How it really is a team approach to this kind of process of reflection and development. So they feel that they're really making progress all the time for the benefit of the children and the families.
And it's, very child focused. So everything they're doing is focused on getting better outcomes for those children.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on now to think about how settings can work together with parents.
So we know that the way that parents and carers interact with their children can influence how their child's language develops. And there was some research that was carried out a few years ago by Woolstone and Law in 2011 that found that how parents feel and what they have and what they do with their children are really influential factors on their child's vocabulary at age 2. So they found that the parents who were motivated and enjoyed spending time with their children, spent time playing and talking with them and reading books together, and also accessing activities in the local area, so maybe going to the library or local play and stay sessions. Those children's language development progressed better. But obviously we know that not all parents are able to do these things, and there's lots of different factors that can influence their ability to do those things.
So things like financial worries, which is a huge problem in Waltham Forest, so housing on top of that, parents' mental health, their general confidence and other social barriers, such as them perhaps not being able to speak English very well, so feeling limited in the amount of activities they can take part in the community, and then also their own experiences of being at school and in education. Often people can feel really daunted by talking to professionals, and although many early years practitioners don't see themselves as professionals and think of themselves in that way, to parents they are. So it's about breaking down that kind of barrier and getting those conversations going.
And that's really important as a practitioner, not to come across as that expert, because we know it's the parents that are the expert of their child, and the relationship between that parent and that child is going to go on for much longer than the relationship that we have with that child whilst they're at the setting. So every family and every child is unique, and it's about us tuning in to that family and those parents to help them to develop their own skills of how they feel comfortable with engaging with their children.
Absolutely. And that can be really challenging for both sides, can't it, in that relationship, and it's also about doing that in a very non-judgmental way as well, and trying to think about what are the reasons. It's too easy sometimes to think, oh, that parent's not interested, but there will always be reasons underlying why they're just kind of always on their phone when they're dropping off, or they never want to have a conversation with the key worker. There's always something going on there, so it's really about finding ways, being creative, building on parents' strength to try and develop that.
There's special times that those kind of conversations can happen. So that drop-off time, pick-up time, maybe open evenings, different times. So there can be a relaxed, genuine conversation with those parents.
And you talked about the setting being welcoming for parents earlier. It's about that open door policy as well. So not that drop off at the door, thank you very much, we've got them now. That kind of approach really doesn't help foster those relationships.
We've also got to think about those working families as well, where drop off is sometimes a little bit of a rush as well. So, thinking of really innovative ways where we can help to support parents to support their child.
And really building that relationship with parents is really important as well, because when you have a really good relationship, then it's much easier to find out more information about the family situation or what the child's interests are. And it's also much easier then to share information with the parents about things that they could maybe be doing at home to support their child's development. If you have that good relationship in place, then those things are much easier.
So let's hear from Michelle again now about how they've been working with parents at their setting. So over the years, you've built up your confidence of working with parents, but some practitioners can find those conversations quite daunting. How would you go about supporting your team, really, to have those conversations with parents, make them a bit easier, really?
I think it's first and foremost, you've got to build up that relationship with the parents. They've got to feel comfortable with you and to talk about your child and know you're on their side, really. I think that you're not some, maybe a school teacher saying, no, you're not doing this correctly, this is wrong.
So you really feel like it's a partnership,
it's a partnership.
Kind of way of working.
We're doing this together. All of us want the very best for the child. So that's really important. I think if you don't establish that, you're not really going to get very far. So once we've done that and you've got that two-way dialogue, then it's easier for parents to talk to us, and often we'll start by saying to them, what do you think? How do you think it's going? And it's at that point some parents will say, well, I think it's going quite well, but I'm not sure, which is a really good time for us to come in and say, yes, we think it's going well, and these are all the things that are really good. Perhaps we need to try a little bit of this as well, and then you can really get a parent on board and working with you. But that really only comes when you've established, I think, that relationship.
Yeah, and how about with your practitioners? How have they built their confidence to do that? What's important for them to know and understand, you think, about that process and that conversation?
I think basically a lot of it has been practicing on each other. So when we were thinking about peer-to-peer observations we've done. They were a bit daunted about peer-to-peer, so they let me do some observations of how they talk to children, how they interact with the children, and based on that we all had little action plans about how we could get better at our interacting, and so that really helped us to, because we were thinking about what we were doing, it really helped us to be able to then sort of turn that around, put that into practice with the children, and then that gives you the confidence to be able to say to a parent, well, this is how I do it, perhaps if you do something a little bit similar, and I felt that really helped with building confidence to speak to parents.
Great. So some more really nice examples from Michelle there, particularly around how having that kind of open door policy and having those conversations right from the start to help build the relationship and set the scene for future work with families, I think has been really successful for them.
And I think also having those opportunities for parents to come into the setting as well is nice. So maybe, the sort of typical play and stay or coffee mornings, but also maybe asking parents what sort of things they like doing or what they'd like to come in and do. So it might be something that's a bit different, so maybe a cooking session or building a den or, anything that, they might kind of help to involve them or get them sort of to come in a little bit better.
That's particularly important for those parents who are not so confident, because sometimes
Yes.
coming in, if you don't have good play skills yourself or your literacy skills are not great, being asked to come in and read, for example, or play with your child can be really daunting, even though to us it seems like, oh, well, why wouldn't they want to do that? But that can be quite scary, and so parents will stay away, and often those things are really well planned and then nobody comes, and that's quite disheartening. So it is really important, like you say, to listen to your parents, get ideas from them, and really plan for them, just in the same way we plan from our children. Let's plan from our parents, really.
And embed that parent's voice into that whole evaluation process within the setting.
Again, encouraging them to take part and raising their confidence, so that then everything just becomes a bit easier. So again, Michelle's done that really well, so we can hear from her one last time now about how she uses very practical strategies to work with families.
We've got the WOW board, and we try and get the parents to any things that they're doing at home with the children, if they can take a little picture or just write a little note, and we'll put it here on the board, and then we put down on the board things that the children are doing very well at preschool, and then the key person will come and have a chat at the end of the session with them, and lots of these things go into their special books as well, just to show how the children are developing.
Great.
We've also got our folders here where the children's work goes at the end of the day, and the children like to put their work in and parents come and find it. Again, it can be a really good talking point, lots of praise going on for all the good things that they've done during the day. I also like to point out to parents, we've got some posters and things up, and a lot around communication and language. I think sometimes when parents first come, you're not really aware of what your child should be saying or how they should be communicating. So sometimes just looking at these are good sort of pointers to think, have we got any extra that we need to do in that area? And I think people appreciate seeing these things here, and we can talk about them together. What we do like to do with every new, especially 2-year-olds into the setting, is do a little programme with them called Toddler Talk, and that's just activities that parents can do at home while we're doing exactly the same thing here in preschool, and then we meet up at the end of each week and find out how did those activities go, and because they're all based around speaking, listening, communicating, it gives you a really good idea of where the child is at, and it helps the parent as well. It gives them ideas of things that they can do at home, and again, it's all building that relationship. And so we do find by the end of that 6 weeks we've got a really good idea of where the child is, what do we need to do next, and how can we do that together.
Yeah. And the activities in your Toddler Talk, they're quite practical, aren't they? Things that parents can do really easily within their daily routines. Can you give us an example of one of them, perhaps?
Yeah, exactly. For the first week, it's all about listening, building up the listening skills. So we literally say on the way home, when your child's in their buggy or they're walking with you, what can you hear? If you start off with, oh, I can hear the bus, can they then say, oh, and I've heard the car, or can we hear a bird? So really it's basically that little listening one, and at the same time we'll be doing a listening walk around the garden at preschool. And then there'll be activities based around the early reading skills. So we'd encourage the parents to take books home, just sit with them, point to the pictures. Maybe not necessarily on the first day read the whole story, but just go through it and look at things, see what the child has to say about the book. So they are really basic things, and then we can build on to those as we go along.
So you've got the home reading scheme for all your children, haven't you? Shall we have a look at that?
Yeah, we've built this little library up over a couple of years, really. Basically using charity shops, because you'll get a lot cheaper books there, and we've got a range of bilingual books, because not all of my parents are English speaking, and it's important to encourage everybody to use this resource. Parents and children, they normally take the books on a daily basis. They can do it weekly, whenever. It's just always here for them to use. Try to build up some information as well. So if they ask what sort of books should I be buying my child, we've got some ideas around 2-year-old books, or some that are good for 3-4-year-olds. Lots of things going on in the community, so when they're not here they could be doing activities and things together. So lots of things that are going on at the library we've got here, and they do some lovely rhyming sessions and music, which is all really important when you're thinking about those communication and language skills. So yeah, they enjoy using that.
And you do have good links with the Children and Family Centre as well, don't you? So I know you'll send children along to sessions such as the sessions in the library, but also to access more support around their communication and language.
We definitely do. I found some of those sessions really helpful once we've sort of identified that a child has some communication difficulties. We sent them along to the drop-in centres, and again, all of those we put on the board, all of the what's going on in the locality, and that's been really helpful, getting guidance from speech therapists about what is the next step, how do we take this child forward, and of course the parents are sharing in all of that with us as well, so it's been really helpful.
Fantastic. So some really nice practical ideas there, not only around the work that she's doing directly with parents, but about working with the wider community and using the resources such as the Children and Family Centres and local libraries.
Yeah. And there's also a really good resource to use, the NCB's What to Expect When document, which is a really nice tool for parents to use, just to kind of really understand child development, what to expect from their child at certain times. And so there's a really good parts in there around communication and language, because it is a prime area within the EYFS. So there's lots of resources out there that parents can use to help support their children.
Great. So what would you say have been the key points from our discussion today?
Well, for me, it would be reflection. It's really important to be that reflective practitioner. And reflection goes right across the nursery, right from leadership through to the practitioners working with the children in the rooms. And that self-evaluation that comes with that reflection, monitoring and being brave to come up with new ideas if things aren't working.
Right. And the role of the leader is obviously embedding that within the setting. So it's a real ethos.
An ethos.
And I think also the interactions as well that are happening in your setting, so between the adults and the children, and really trying to reflect on those and think about how you can improve them and use the strategies that we've talked about. And the adults are really one of the most important resources that you have.
Yeah, I think for me it's thinking, and again reflection again is definitely our main point, but thinking about the relationships with parents and continually trying to improve those and engage them in their children's learning right across the early years foundation stage, but particularly around communication and language. So thanks both for joining me today and having this discussion.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for the webinar. If you would like to find out more about our project, you can visit our webpage where you'll find more information and also resources. And also you could follow us on our Facebook page.